is there. It is certainly a blessing to be together this morning, to gather here to worship God together and to study His Word. Amen? Amen. Amen. There we go. This morning we're going to continue our study through the Exodus. This is our 6th lesson in this series. If you missed any of them, they're available on YouTube. Go back and watch them. This has been a wonderful study to engage in because the Israelites are on this journey home. And what we're doing in this series is looking at their journey because we're on a journey. And we're drawing comparisons to our own journey, and we're learning lessons that relate to our own journey. And we come now to the next major event in their homeward journey. But before we dive into the text, I want to tell you about these two boys who are identical twins with only one major difference. One of them was a hope-filled optimist, and the other was a hopeless pessimist. In fact, they were so extremely different that their parents decided to take both of them to a psychologist. And the psychologist suggested a plan that he thought might help. The plan was to acquire 2 large rooms, then fill one room with every toy imaginable, everything any young boy would ever want to play with, and then fill the other room with a giant pile of horse manure. The pessimistic child was then sent to the toy-filled room, and the optimistic child was sent to the manure-filled room. And through one-way mirrors, the psychologist observed their behaviors to see how they would respond to their environments. And he first observed the pessimistic child who played for a while with those variety of toys, and then he suddenly stopped playing, and he complained out loud. He said, "I don't have anybody to play with." At that, the psychologist decided to go over and look at the other room with the optimistic child and the pile of manure. And when he got there, he was stunned because the child was head deep in the pile of manure, digging in the pile of manure. And he ran in there to stop him and said, "What are you doing?" And the optimistic child said, "Well, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere." It is very interesting how two people can look at the same situation and the same event and the same circumstances, and one will only see the negative and the other will see the positive. You know, the next event in our study of the Exodus centers around that dynamic. If you'll turn over to Numbers chapter 13, that's where we're going to be engaging in our study. I want you to ask yourself right now, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? Is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? Because I do think it matters how we think. In Numbers chapter 10, we find out that the Israelites have been instructed to leave Mount Sinai. Last week, we were with the Israelites at Mount Sinai when they engaged in that worship of a golden calf. In Numbers chapter 10, they're instructed to depart in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th day of the month. That doesn't mean much to you, but here's what you need to know. They spent about a year at the base of Mount Sinai before they left. They spent a year there receiving the law and likely constructing the tabernacle before they left. And their next stop is on the southern border of the Promised Land. They're there. The place that they set out to from Egypt, they're going to arrive at its border in just a matter of days or weeks. It's called the Wilderness of Paran. And when they get there, in Numbers chapter 13, beginning in the first verse, they receive their first big assignment. The Lord spoke to Moses. And the Lord said, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." The Israelites are instructed to send spies to investigate, to report on this land. Now, here's what strikes me. Why does God want them to send out spies? Does God need to know the layout of the land? Certainly not. He created it. Does God need to know about the military strength present in that area? No. He alone outnumbered them. The point is that there's nothing the spies can discover or report on that God needs to know. There's nothing the spies can do that's going to be a benefit to God. But God still commissioned the spies. And it's their assignment to report on two major matters, to report on military matters and to report on economic matters. So if you look at Numbers chapter 13, you skip down to verse 17 through 20, here are the instructions that they are given. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into the Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in the land are strong or weak, whether there are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now, these instructions, like I said, include military observations. They're seeing whether the people are strong or weak, whether they live in camps or strongholds. They're reporting on military matters. But they're also reporting on economic matters because they're supposed to go see if the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether or not it's got trees, and they're supposed to bring back some of the produce of the land. Their job is to find out, okay, how strong are the people that we're going to be going up against, and how good is the land? That's the assignment. That's the task. And those spies did their job. They returned from spying out the land, and their report was unanimous on 2 points that you can read in verses 25 through 29. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran of Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." So all the spies agreed that the land was perfect. And all the spies agreed that the people that inhabited it were strong. And I think that explains why God sent the spies. He didn't need that information, but He did need His people to understand, to recognize, to get the fact that He's taking them to the promised land, to an ideal land. He's not giving them some rinky-dink land. He's not taking them to some okay, mediocre land. He's taking them to the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. But He also wanted them to realize that the people who are there are not pushovers. That they're going to need Him in order to capture the land. That without God, the Israelites can't take the land for themselves because the people are strong. So God sent these spies for a reason. So when you arrive at this point in the story of the Exodus, you got to think what the Israelites have experienced thus far. They've witnessed God's power when He brought plagues on the Egyptians. They witnessed God's power when He parted the Red Sea and led them across on dry land. They've witnessed God's provisions when He would drop manna on the ground every morning and send quail every evening. They've witnessed God's power as He's opened rocks for water to come out. They've witnessed God's victory as He already defeated the Amalekites on their behalf once. They've witnessed all these things that God have done. So you think that it would be easy for them to move forward. You would think after experiencing all these things, they would not hesitate to go take this perfect land. But their next step is where opinions changed. The spies agreed that the land was ideal and the people were strong, but they disagreed on what to do next. Two of the spies, a guy named Caleb and a guy named Joshua, optimistically assessed the situation, and they encouraged the people to go up and occupy the land because they believed that God was on their side and He would give it to them. But the other 10 spies, they had an incredibly negative outlook regarding the situation. Look at what they said in Numbers chapter 13, verses 31 through 33. They said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." In verse 32, they said, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." They're saying, hey, no, listen, yeah, the land's great, but you don't understand. The people we saw, they were too mighty. There's no way we can succeed here. In comparison to them, we're bugs. And it makes you sit there and go, okay, have they forgotten about who's on their side? Their negativity is directly attached to their level of faith right now. And what ends up happening is that the entire community of Israel latches on to this negative report. According to Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, the people collectively wept that night, grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and they said, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" Here they are on the precipice of a new land, a great land, a promised land. A land that God had told them would be theirs on numerous occasions at this point. And they would rather choose a leader and go back to Egypt than move forward. All because 10 guys brought a bad report of the land. And the community's defeatist, pessimistic, faithless, hopeless mindset greatly offended God. Look at what He said to Moses in Numbers chapter 14, verse 11 and 12. He said, "How long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I've done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they." Once again, Moses doesn't take God up on the offer to start all over with him, and instead requests God's forgiveness of the people, which God grants in verse 20, but not without identifying some consequences. So we'll pick up the reading in verse 20 through 23, and God says this, "Truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers, and none of those who despise me shall see it." That's the consequence. You don't get to go in. You're going to be kept out. And if you continue reading through the text of Numbers chapter 14, you'll see in verse 28 through 34 that God specifically made the Israelites wander in the wilderness for 40 years so that everyone over the age of 20 who initiated and or perpetrated this negative mentality would not be around to enter the promised land. God intentionally made them wander so that He could remove the negative people and they wouldn't be able to pass on their negativity to the next generation. So what does this have to do with us? What's the application for us? How do we take this episode in the Exodus and make it benefit us today? Well, one of the things that stands out to me about Mosaic law is that God was intentional about protecting the Israelites from things that were harmfully contagious. So he had laws that quarantined those infected with specific diseases like leprosy. You can read about the quarantine rules in Leviticus chapter 13. He had laws that forbid them from contact with dead people, because we know that from a medical standpoint, from a health perspective, there are diseases you can get from coming in contact with dead bodies. And he had laws you can read about in Deuteronomy chapter 23 about what you do with human waste. God had a sanitary law that involves you going outside the camp, digging a hole, and taking care of your business, then covering it up. That's not the part of the Mosaic law you typically read because, well, it's just not enjoyable. But God was the first health director, so to speak. He intentionally gave laws that would minimize the spread of contagious diseases. But he didn't just do that for the physical person. He also wanted to minimize the spread of spiritual diseases. So, for instance, you can go to the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 7, and he has laws that say you're not supposed to intermarry with people from these other nations. God was not against interracial marriage. What God was against was interfaith marriage. He knew that if you married someone of a different faith, that they might influence you to abandon your faith in him to follow their faith in a different deity. He also had a rule in Deuteronomy in the 13th chapter that dealt with a situation where someone tries to get you to worship an idol. It could be your spouse, it could be your parents, it could be your children, it could be your siblings, it could be your next door neighbor. If anyone tried to get you to worship an idol, you have the right to kill them. It's pretty drastic, but if you go read it in Deuteronomy chapter 13, that was the law. They would be stoned to death for trying to tempt you to worship someone other than God. God was intentional about not letting spiritual diseases spread among his people too. So he had some pretty strict laws about them. I think it's important for us to consider that policy as we move forward in this study of what happened with the 12 spies. Because one contagion that is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, but that is important for us to be cognizant of, is what psychologists call emotional contagion. According to Psychology Today, emotional contagion refers to the phenomenon in which a person unconsciously mirrors or mimics the emotions of those around them. In the simplest of terms, feelings, mindsets, attitudes, they can all be contagious. We know laughter can be contagious. You maybe even have heard of a sympathetic crier, someone who cries when they see other people cry. It's all part of this large spectrum of how our feelings and our emotions and our mindsets and our attitudes can be spread among us. And this may include upbeat emotions such as enthusiasm and joy, but it also may include negative ones such as sadness, fear, and anger. In the case of the Israelites, I believe the 10 spies spread the disease of negativity. In her book, Mastering Community, author Kristen Porath, who is a professor at the University of North Carolina's Business School, writes, "Negativity is a virus. It's more destructive than we might think. Not only does it tank people's performance and lead to toxic interactions within the community, but to make matters worse, like any virus, it's contagious, infecting those who are exposed to it. We've learned that even small doses of negativity get passed on to other team members. A negative attitude, a negative mindset is just as contagious as a virus that our bodies get in contact with. She goes on to cite some research that has shown that negative emotions led people to displace bad feelings onto their organization, which resulted in decreasing the effort or time they put into work, lowering their level of performance, and reducing their commitment to their organization. They also displaced their negative emotions onto their colleagues, bosses, customers, and clients. Negativity in the workplace led to communication breakdowns, lack of cooperation, failure to share information and knowledge, and decreased productivity. Now, I want you to think about this in the context of the Israelites. 12 guys returned from spying out the land, and the vast majority, more than 80% of those spies, communicate a pessimistic outlook regarding their ability to take that land that God has promised them. Their negative mindset then infected the community, causing the community of Israelites to collectively give up hope in God's promises, to refuse to cooperate in His mission, and to choose stagnation over progress. Yes, what this book talks about has to do with the work environment, has to do with life in a job scenario, but it applies to any type of community, just like the Israelite community that it infected. That negativity of those 10 spies became a negativity among an entire community of people, because negativity is contagious. The problem with negativity is that it is ultimately an expression of faithlessness. God Himself made that correlation in this story. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 33, He told the Israelites that your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and they shall suffer for your faithlessness. God draws the connection between the negative mindset and faithlessness. It's important for us to recognize that connection. Because when you are negative as a child of God, what you're communicating is a lack of faith in His ability to provide, or His ability to protect, or His overall plan. Your faithlessness is a symptom, your negativity is a symptom of your lack of faith. And here's what we know from the Bible. We know that without faith it is impossible to please God, because Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6 tells us that. And we know based on Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8 that the faithless are numbered with the cowardly, the murderers, the sexually immoral, the idolaters, and all liars, as those who will find themselves in a lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. That negativity that is an expression of your faithlessness will cost you your soul, or can cost you your soul. You see, here's what we need to realize as we study this episode. We need to understand that not only is negativity contagious, but it's also dangerous, because it can affect whether or not we make it to our eternal home. So we need to be very intentional about protecting ourselves against the contagion of negativity. And so let me give you 3 pieces of advice to protect yourself when it comes to the contact with negativity. Number 1, distance yourself from carriers of negativity when possible. You might have to make intentional decisions not to associate with, not to be around, not to have a relationship with people who are negative. And that's a biblical principle. Social distancing is a strategy God suggested on numerous occasions in the Bible. Think about Paul's declaration in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, that bad company corrupts good morals. The principle is don't be around bad company. And then you can think about 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, where we're given the instruction to not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. We typically just take that passage and apply it to marriage, but let's be honest. Any sort of connection that partners us with unbelievers or with someone who is a negative influence, that's a partnership we need to be cautious of. So put it in the context of people who are negative. You might need to separate yourself from someone, distance yourself from someone, because they're spreading a negative attitude, a negative mentality, a negative feeling. And you don't want your spiritual well-being to be compromised. Those who possess and or promote negativity would certainly be numbered among those who can compromise your spiritual well-being. So you might need to distance yourself from carriers of negativity. But let me give you a second piece of advice. Be careful what you verbalize. I'm not telling you to put on masks. It just works to cover the mouth. Be careful what you verbalize. The author of the book I referenced a moment ago says, negative language is particularly insidious and potent. Be mindful of what you're thinking and particularly of what you're saying. What we say out loud carries significant weight. She then cites research that has shown it's 10 times more damaging to our sense of thriving if we verbalize a negative thought than if we just think it. So, be careful what you verbalize. Her instructions mimic Paul's instructions in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29 to let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. In other words, let your speech be seasoned with salt, as he would say in Colossians. What you say, control it. Don't let your verbalization, your words, your speech habits be controlled by negativity. Because what you say has an incredible impact on how you think. For from within, out of the heart, Jesus would say. So we need to be careful what we verbalize. And finally, a third piece of advice, filter what your mind ingests. The truth is, what you let in often is what comes out. So you need to put a filter on what you're consuming mentally. Think about Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Paul instructs us to think about whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, whatever is excellent, and whatever is worthy of praise. In this passage, he's prescribing a plan for experiencing the peace of God. And after he's instructed us to rejoice in the Lord always and to not be anxious about anything and to pray about everything, he gives us a standard by which we should measure what we think about. In order for our thoughts to meet those criteria in verse 8, we must filter what our mind ingests based on those criteria. So think about the music you listen to. Does it fit that criteria? Think about what you watch on television. Granted, if you were watching the Arkansas-Tennessee game last night, and you're a Tennessee fan, it may not have been commendable or lovely. Sorry, guys. But what you let in is what's going to come out. So consume what's positive. Consume what's beneficial, not what's going to be negative and bring you down. This morning, I did not know when I started studying the 12 spies that I was going to be taking this route of negativity. But I had a realization as I prepared and studied this that I've bought into negativity around me way too often. That I've been far too influenced by negativity in my life than I've realized. I've caught negativity, and I don't want to catch it or spread it anymore. The Lord's kingdom is too glorious for negativity, and the home He's prepared for us is too great and too beautiful and too magnificent for us to be negative. The promises God has placed on us, the blessings that He has given us, aren't worthy of negativity. So let's shed negativity in whatever form it takes. Let's not be perpetuators of negativity any longer. Let's not be infected by or spread negativity any longer. Because as the Israelites have shown us, on their homeward journey, some of them didn't make it because of negativity. We don't typically think of it in those terms. We don't typically think of a negative attitude as being something that prevents us from our eternal reward. But if we could learn anything from the Israelites, a 40-year wandering in the wilderness was directly due to a negative mindset that they all bought into. Let's stop that cycle. Let's be people who stop looking behind and start straining for what's ahead. Let's be people who focus on the positive. And there's nothing but positive in our Lord Jesus Christ. If you have any need to respond to the invitation this morning, we offer it as we do all the time. You can come forward to these seats up front and we'll pray with you. We'll hear your needs. We'll figure out what we can do. Whatever your need is, won't you come while together we can stand and sing.